Okay, everybody. Welcome to today's meeting. Can you all hear me? That's always a bonus, isn't it? Okay. So, item 1, apologies for absence. Sylvia?
We have apologies from Councillors John Taylor, Barry Warner and David Chadwick.
Have we any others? Apologies? No? Okay. Thank you. Don't forget him. You've had it. Okay. So, Councillor Garrido, please. Yeah. Thanks for that. So, on Chair's announcements, item 2, urgent business, I'm going to bring this up as item 9A in part A and item 17 in part B. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest, especially if anybody's on the GMCA board, etc. Can you please make sure you fill the form in the relevant sheet and add it into Sylvia for the meeting? Okay, if you have to leave, you're okay. Okay. We have to leave. The legal position is. Okay, so don't forget your form. All right. Item 4, minutes of the AGM. Can we move those as the correct minutes, please? Yep.
Right, okay. Chair's announcements and urgent business on the minutes. It says that Councillor John Leach Manchester was appointed to the GM Accessible Transport Trust. That's not GMCA, is it?
No.
Because if it is, it was John Taylor, not John Leach. Right. Okay.
We'll amend the minutes.
And it's John Taylor. Smashing. All agreement of that. So, minutes of the ordinary meeting. Everybody happy with those minutes? Yeah. Thank you very much. Item 5, minutes from subcommittees. Buzz Network. Is that agreed? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item B, Metrolink and Rail.
Fed up with it. No, he's told me I've got to turn it off. Right. It says Vicky Cropper, Northern Rail. There was nobody there from Northern Rail. And Cross Country were there and they're not in attendance. So we need Cross Country putting on. Okay, thank you.
We'll amend them for when they go round to the next meeting.
Smashing, thank you very much. Everybody else okay with everything on the Metrolink then? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Councillor?
Apologies, Chair, but I couldn't actually find where this room was upstairs because we were originally told that it was on the second floor. So, yeah, my query on was in relation to the 80 million fund for the new 27 new Metrolink trams. I'm assuming that the vast majority of those new trams are for doubling up. But I just wondered whether there was actually any revenue cost attached to these new trams in terms of additional services, not just doubled trams.
Is this on the capital update on the Metrolink? There is a point later on that you can raise it on there if you like.
Well, I thought this was on 5B.
Yes. You still want to raise it on there?
Well, it
Okay.
appears to have been on 5B.
Right.
On minute MR 1808.
Hi, Councillor Leach. So your question, yes, the vast majority of those trams are earmarked for doubling of services, so provision of capacity through doubles. There are 3 of those earmarked for if we're successful in an application to extend the airport line to Terminal 2 in Manchester Airport. But I think the point is it gives us a lot of flexibility in the future for additional services.
So can I just clarify then, as it stands at the moment, there's no actual revenue, ongoing revenue cost attached to this then?
there is an ongoing revenue cost, and in terms of the financial case that we made, in terms of the revenue we would gain from additional capacity and patronage growth on the network, we would more than cover the operational cost to maintain those vehicles and run them around in service, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Phil?
Thanks, Chair. I'm quite intrigued that the Travel Safe officers have been again to do a presentation on how successful they are on the Metrolink system. Every year we have the same presentation. We don't need presentations on how wonderful the unit's running. We need to go back to basics and get warranted police officers and specials back on the system. Like I said at the last meeting, we can flood the system with travel safe officers and PSSOs. They are not making a difference. We've seen crime rise, all types of antisocial behaviour, windows being smashed. It'd be quite interesting to see how many people have been prosecuted for the windows being smashed along the Oldham and Rochdale line. How many people have been prosecuted for different types of the antisocial behaviour? I'd urge this committee to push forward with getting the police back onto the Metrolink to take control of the Metrolink before something serious happens.
No?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Burke said. There's been a big splash recently, publicity-wise, in terms of some unfortunate incidents, particularly on the Oldham Rochdale line. But then it goes quiet after that, so nobody knows whether anybody's been prosecuted. I think we need a few high-profile cases. I don't know what the policy is on that. Maybe Danny might tell us. But you know, I would be interested to find out, please, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to Councillor Burke, I was lost and abandoned at Victoria Station on Monday night because the Bury tram had disappeared somewhere. Anyway, I was watching the Rochdale tram, Councillor Burke, and 6 policemen got on one of them. I thought that was rather overkill. They could have done with 3 on one and wait 3 for the next one. But they were, and I got on the Rochdale tram to get to Victoria, and it was very, very noisy and very frightening. So the police do need to watch it. But they were there on Monday night.
Okay. Do you want to just come back on that?
Yeah, Chair, we need to be clear that we've got PSSOs on the line, but the PSSOs are taking a lot more duties. They're not just covering the Metrolink system. And Councillor Sullivan's probably getting mixed up with what a PSSO is and what a normal regular police officer is.
Right. Daniel, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just on the question of antisocial behaviour in general, I think we'll obviously keep reporting it to the Metrolink and Rail Networks Committee. We are seeing a downward trend in the number of antisocial behaviour issues and the number of crime-related issues. We are getting better at separating those two things out, actually, where it lends itself to more serious crime or antisocial behaviour or general bad behaviour. Smashed windows, the case recently, we did an appeal over media, and in fact it was an appeal to parents because a lot of the people who are doing the things that disrupt Metrolink services are actually very young kids. And I think in that particular case, the parents of an 11-year-old boy got in touch with us. So it's very difficult to have a prosecution in those kinds of cases. So a lot of the work that we're doing through the Travel Safe Partnership is more community related. We've seen, I think, 3,000 kids in the Oldham area with crucial crew exercise. I think that's been very successful. But having said that, I do take the point. We had a presentation at the subcommittee from GMP. And I think, if I remember rightly, we can make that presentation available to members here. There are, I think, 10 warranted officers in the TSU, along with 50 PCSOs. So the vast majority of the presence you do see is PCSOs. But I think some of the work now going forward relates to actually working with community police as well as the Travel Safe to try and join that up a little bit better. We have had some success. I appreciate the frustration because it's still very visible. But I'm happy to maybe follow up with councillors afterwards in terms of trying to get some of the numbers about prosecutions and so on to see exactly what is happening and to see that level of follow-up.
Thanks for that. I know on the Mayor's meeting on the 17th, 27th, yes, and I've got a meeting with Bob and Danny as well that afternoon, so we'll make sure that we keep it on the agenda. Okay, has anybody else got anything to raise on that? No? Thank you very much. So, item 6, Register of Key Decisions. Liz? Is there anything that anybody else wants to raise on that? Yes?
Okay. It's page 29, and it says the GMC has 3 thematic scrutiny committees. These committees' role is to contribute to the development of GMCA's strategic and policies and to scrutinise decisions. Now, unless I've got scrutiny absolutely wrong, I thought a policy team made the policies and scrutinised those policies. I didn't think they helped to develop them.
Yes?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to hopefully make a helpful suggestion in relation to the key decisions. On Manchester Council, in the Register of Key Decisions, we have at the beginning of the paper additions to the register and then removals from the register. So it's actually easy to see what's been added and what's been taken away rather than it just being all in one list. I think it would be helpful for members if we could actually see what things have actually been added, because it's just easier to read rather than having to scroll through all the new things that to look for the new things that have been added since the last register.
Okay, that's a good point. Anybody got anything else before I bring Liz in? Liz?
Sorry, yes, obviously the main function of scrutiny is to scrutinise, and that's their legislative function. But I think also quite often scrutiny committees will have working groups or task and finish groups that will inform policy that can then go through to the decision-making body. So I think most scrutiny committees will have both the function and the main function of scrutinising decisions, but also the opportunity to be used to develop policy. And I think this is sort of standard wording really from the Constitution as well.
Okay, smashing. Thank you very much. Moving on. Item 7, subcommittee appointments and substitute members. Can we all agree those? Agree. Thank you very much. Item 8, cross-country franchise update. Caroline?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report to update you on the cross-country franchise. You may be aware that the franchise currently run by cross-country is due to come to an end by 2020 when it will be replaced by a new franchise. And as part of the initial work to look at the specification, DFT is currently consulting stakeholders and the public on the current services and the possible future aspirations and improvements that people may have. This consultation is due to close on the 30th of August, with the responses informing the possible minimum specification being issued to the bidders for the next franchise. So it's just to inform you that TFGM will be issuing a response to the consultation. We'll be seeking to safeguard the existing levels of services and ensure capacity is provided to cater for future growth. And we are sharing our draft of our response with the district, and we will be seeking feedback. And our response will be around the principles that we've detailed in 2.3 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Caroline, in paragraph 1.3, what made me laugh about this is the DFT say that they're asking thought-provoking questions, and then they list the things that they could list on every single franchise because people can't get a seat, the trains are overcrowded, they'd like more trains, you know, and so on. So I don't see how any of those questions are thought-provoking. I think those are the questions that DFT need to take account of. But I have a feeling I'm asking John Lamont rather than you this question, because the thing I want to know is we've had a series of disasters from the DFT when it comes to franchising, so much so that the successful bidders have ended up after so many years saying we can't run it anymore because we're losing lots of money. And normally speaking, if a private contractor said that to you, you'd say, well, hard luck, you signed up for it, you'll have to carry the losses But the government then steps in and actually bails them out because they're such a caring government. So, but the question I'm asking you, you don't have to comment on that, the question I'm asking you is, have the DFT learnt any lessons about franchising? Are they actually doing something different? Because obviously in this report, it doesn't say they've learnt any lessons at all, does it?
I'll just take one more first. John?
Thank you, Chair. I think this is probably the most complicated franchise of all the rail franchises. Certainly it's the most complicated one I'm aware of. And I also think this is the franchise where a fare was found that was actually over £1,000 for a journey. It included part of a cross-country route. But my question is really about whether or not we are actually taking the right approach by just simply saying what's best for the bits that includes Greater Manchester. Should we actually be looking at whether or not it would be more sensible to simplify the existing complicated franchise and try and get the bits that actually affect Greater Manchester out of this franchise and into another franchise? And should we actually be suggesting that DFT look at whether or not this is actually good for the bits that are in Greater Manchester, or for that matter, for the bits that, that cover other areas too?
Has anybody got any more questions before I pass over to John? No? John?
Thanks very much, Chair. So I think on the first point about have the DFT learnt lessons on franchising, it's hard for me to say, sitting here, whether they have or haven't, in truth. I think there are a number of reviews of what's happened and some of the disasters that have happened that we know about, and we're just going to have to see what they come up with in truth. I'll let Caroline talk to the scope of the cross-country franchise that Councillor Leach mentioned, but I think these things are well known and our views are well taken down in Westminster. Further than that, it's hard for me to say, to be honest.
Yeah, Councillor Leach, I would say that we're not shy when we respond to consultations, and we will say the bigger things that need saying for greatest customer benefit, and the team will look at that and whether we want to just answer the question as it's been posed or answer a bigger question that's in our head in terms of remapping. You've got to get the balance right between us trying to make their decisions for them and us trying to make suggestions that make them think in a different way that hopefully would benefit GM and nation overall in a better, more comprehensive way, that where the jigsaw fits together better. So yes, we'll certainly include something of that ilk. Quite what that'll look like and to what level of detail we would want to specify, we need to have a think about. But I'm happy to have a conversation with you separately about it if you like.
Okay. Yep. Now, with two things to approve on there. One, TFGM's current approach in responding to the public consultation, and two, to approve the delegation of authority to the Chief Executive of TFGM in consultation with the Chair of TFGMC to sign off the consultation response. Okay? Is everybody okay with that? Yeah. Thank you very much. Item 9, Ring and Ride update. Now, I'm going to have to pass over to Guy on that because some of us are director of Gamatl and we'll have to leave. Okay?
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe Alison's going to introduce the report and then I'll throw it open to questions and comments.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. This report is about Ring and Ride, and it's providing an update on the performance of the service and also outlining current concerns and challenges. Largely, they're concerned with the ageing fleet that operates that service at the moment due to reduced investment in recent times as a result of funding constraints. Some replacement has occurred, but there's a further 20 vehicles that require replacing later this year, and without external funding to support this, the service offer would be significantly amended. So officers are currently considering options which include purchasing replacement vehicles, the leasing of vehicles as an alternative, or a combination of both, and also exploring utilisation of other available vehicle resource, and that's part of a wider accessible transport review that we're undertaking at the moment. In recent times, there has been a fare increase to the standard fare and a planned introduction of a charge for concessionary plus pass users coming in August. We're also looking at any other commercial opportunities that might be available to support the service. Ultimately, we'll continue to work to develop options and bring a further report to this committee, but it should be noted that we'll need to progress any additional funding requirements through the combined authority. Thank you.
Before I call for comments or questions, could I explain, obviously, the people who've left the room are the people best placed to comment on this, because that's their job is to run that company. And I do know that they, in terms of commenting on the future, they are strongly of the view that this is an extremely valuable service across Greater Manchester, and they'd like the committee to endorse that. It's also the case, I know, that their view collectively, and they're the experts on it in detail rather than we are, is that it would be more sensible to purchase the additional vehicles than to lease them. So I'd be looking for us, if we can, to endorse their views. Obviously, the detail work has to be done, but they are leaning in that direction. So I just want the committee as a whole to know that on the two substantive issues here, their view is that they are very keen for a long-term future of Ring and Ride rather than to let it wither on the vine, and that they are leaning in the direction of purchasing because the long-term lifetime costs are likely to be lower than the leasing. So with that, would people like to... Yes?
Chair, Rochdale fully supports the report. Ring and Ride plays a very important part in our community, bringing the disabled, the elderly and the housebound together to our local communities, so we fully endorse the report.
Me, then you, yeah. Yes, I'm glad Rochdale supported. I certainly don't want it to wither on the vine. It's a very useful service, and it's been used with us for the last 30 years. It's got better and better, I have to say. I was leaning towards, I go with whatever the committee want, the ones that are doing all the work. But I was looking at, I thought leasing would be more flexible as the vehicles change, as you know, we go to electric vehicles. Also, the size of the vehicles, I've never seen more than 2 or 3 people on these massive buses. I think I'd get bombed or something. I think it might be helpful if they do look more carefully into leasing, because I think that's the way everybody's going now, because everything's changing so quickly. However, I will go with obviously what the committee want. Thank you.
Could I say, those issues were raised in our Labour group before the meeting, because of course the members, while debarred from this forum, are allowed to comment in the Labour group, and the chair of the committee answered that by saying that the technology within the industry isn't changing at the pace that would require the leasing as the preferred option. So that was raised, you're right, it's an important issue, and he gave an answer that that had he been here, he would have answered you in those terms, but he wasn't here, he's not allowed to be here.
To come back on that, we don't know how fast technology is moving. It's moving faster than we can think, and I do think vehicles are changing, and Ring and Ride will have to change with them, otherwise they'll get left behind. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, there is a further report about the overall operational activities of Ring and Ride that's going to come later on, and that would cover all those issues.
Just to say, obviously, Ring and Ride is a really important feature. Obviously, quite often when bus services are being curtailed, the subsidised bus services, the Ring and Ride option is brought forward for those people who have access to it, who are unable to walk at the distance required to the new bus service. But I'd just like to welcome paragraph 6.8, utilising other vehicle resource. I think that's a very good idea. There are all sorts of different vehicles in the health service, or school buses and what have you, that could be more practically used if they're not being used all day. So I really welcome that that's been raised and it's being looked at. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. I think it's heartening to know that you mentioned there was debate in Labour group. We had a similar debate in the Conservative group. I think this issue is clearly no one's divided on party political lines. The same concerns are shared by all political parties. I think that the one thing that we can agree on is that we all think ring and ride is important. It provides a valuable service. It's about getting the best value for money and strengthening it for the years to come. I do understand the concerns Councillor Sullivan has about leasing, that we might buy now but then come to regret that in years to come when needs change. But I think, as the point has been made, this issue, it's heartening to know it's been discussed at the top levels and that this has been considered. If those members consider that buying is the right way to go rather than leasing, I'm certainly happy to endorse that. Thank you.
As the report also suggests, it's not necessary either or. There could be a mixture depending upon the results of future work that's being done.
Thank you, and I apologise for being a little late into the meeting this morning. It serves me right for not bringing my nameplate in. Just got 2 points to raise, if you don't mind. Firstly, I live in Marple, where I live. I'm right on the border of Derbyshire and Cheshire and so forth. And unless I'm mistaken, the Ring and Ride service, which is excellent, only provides service into Manchester. And what I was going to ask is, would it be considered that we look at extending the distance over into a small boundary? If you live on the border, for instance, if you got somebody where I live now, their nearest chemist or doctors that they're registered with could be 2 miles into the area, into their journey, but crossing the border into Derbyshire or Cheshire. And obviously this isn't just myself, this is kind of the whole of Manchester, which borders into different counties. And the second one is regarding the vehicle replacement scheme, which whichever way it goes, obviously we'll go with best practice, but it says here that there's 20 vehicles due for withdrawal in 2018. I'm only asking that obviously these vehicles, I'm going to guess, will not have the same amount of abuse than a normal taxi service vehicle would have. And would these vehicles be taken out at the right time? If they've still got, they might have high mileage on them, but I'm going to guess that they are in very good condition and well serviced and looked after. So bringing them out, even though it's 20 yards due for renewal, would it not be a better practice to look at withdrawing them when they needed to be withdrawn, rather than just do a blanket withdrawal, regardless of the mileage and so forth? Thank you.
Alison, would you like to answer those, please?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the options around purchasing or leasing, we'll obviously look at the different things that are available in more detail and do the detailed work as we've said. I think in terms of technology, we're also very closely looking at the different types of technology advancements that are being made out there and keeping very closely abreast of what is happening in that space. I think in terms of how many people use the service and the use of different resource, again, that's something, a key piece of work we're looking at the moment in terms of an accessible transport review, working with district officers to understand the different types of resource that exist across health, across transport, and how things can potentially best be used in a potentially a more efficient manner. So that's also underway at the moment. Just in regard to the two specific points that were raised, the Ring and Ride service does have a 6-mile limit, but certainly that can be used for journeys up to that length. But happy to talk more specifically about your situation after this. And the vehicles themselves, they are actually very well used, so they do get perhaps more use than you may imagine, and certainly our view is that it is the time to replace them, that they have reached that point.
John, yours.
Just one comment and 2 questions, if I can. The first the comment is in relation to the differential cost of purchasing and leasing. Unless my maths has failed me, it read to me that purchasing over the 10-year period or leasing over a 10-year period is significantly cheaper to purchase the vehicles. It may well be as a stopgap if the capital's not available, that we would have to potentially consider leasing for 1 or a couple of years. But I think in terms of a long-term strategy, purchasing is clearly significantly cheaper than leasing, unless my maths has failed me. My 2 questions. My first question is in relation to 2.2 on page 44, and that's in relation to the running costs. It refers to the remaining costs funded by a combination of fares and reserves, but we're not given any information as to how much reserves are actually being required to make up the shortfall. Now, that might be okay in the short term as a short-term measure, but I'm guessing that in the medium to long term, that's not sustainable. So I was a bit surprised that we didn't get any information about the level of reserves and how much we were actually adding to the running costs from the reserves. My second question was in relation to, and this apologies if this is a stupid question from a new member. It was in relation to 2.4 and the people who can actually access the service. The third option are 70 years old or over, have mobility issues and hold a TFGM older person's concessionary pass. Am I right in thinking that other pensioners, so a 69-year-old pensioner, could potentially miss out on being able to use the service, may have mobility issues, does hold a TFGM older person's concessionary pass, but because they're 69 rather than 70, is not entitled to use this service. So my question was, why is it 70 as the age limit as opposed to of pensionable age?
Alison?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the specific points on fares and reserves, I don't have the specific detail to hand, but what I can say is that reserves have been utilised over time to kind of support the running operations. They have been getting lower. So it's not in a position where you know that can continue. As I say, I don't have the specific detail, but can talk again after the meeting. In respect of the 70 years old or over age limit, that is an age limit that exists. It's recently been reviewed as being and considered appropriate. Obviously, the people that hold a concessionary disabled person pass can use the service. So if they have a mobility issue that is classed as them being disabled, they can use it if they are younger than 70, but 70 is considered the appropriate age.
If there are, well, you want to come back on that, John? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know why 70 is considered to be the appropriate age as opposed to 69 or when someone becomes a pensioner. But actually what I really wanted to come back on was in relation to the use of reserves. I accept that this has been done as a measure to cover the shortfall, but actually one of the recommendations is comment on the future of the ring and ride service. If we can't afford to run it because we've used up our reserves, that's going to cause real problems. There is 100% support for this service. We need to make sure it's sustainable. So if we're using reserves, when reports about it are coming to the meeting and we're using reserves, we should know what the figures are. We should have those in front of us.
Look, I can't comment on the current situation because I'm not involved, but when I was involved in the past as a member of the board of GMATL, you'd sometimes use reserves temporarily to cushion the fare increase that was required to do it in stages. So whether that's what's happened now, I don't know. But we did in the past sometimes think that in order to balance the books, you'd be looking at a bigger increase than you'd like to impose in a single step. And therefore, you would use reserves and enable you to make a gradual move in the direction of that which would be long-term viable.
Sorry, Chair, I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not criticising the use of reserves. All I'm saying is, if we're using reserves, which are by definition not an unemptiable pot of money, we ought to know how much we're using and how much is actually there, so that we can ensure that if we are going to continue to have to use reserves, that it is in a sustainable way.
A legitimate question. I'm sure the officers will be able to give you an answer in due course. Thanks.
Just very quickly, Chair, I think that there is consensus in the room that this is an important and a valued service, so I'd like to find out when is this report coming back, please?
The further report about the longer-term management arrangements and use of technology and so on.
So we'll bring a report back in the autumn because the findings that we make from our work will need to feed into the budget setting process for the next financial year.
When in the autumn?
I need to just check the meeting dates. Can I confirm to you after the meeting? It will be the earliest available opportunity.
With those comments, can we note the contents of the report? Comment on the future has been that I think there's unanimity that this is a very valuable service that we'd like to see continue across the conurbation for the foreseeable future. The business case obviously needs further details, and we accept that work is ongoing, and the further report that we brought to the committee will be as early as possible sometime in the autumn. So with those, is that agreed unanimously? Yes, everybody agrees that. Thank you very much. Could we recall the chair, please?
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, item 9A, urgent business for the forthcoming changes to the bus network. Nick?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This is a familiar report to those who attend the Bus Network Committee. This is to update members on forthcoming changes to the bus network and also seek approval on changes that impact on the subsidised bus budget. The report's broken down into 3 sections. Just to explain the 3 sections individually. First of all, Annex A. This refers to services where the commercial market has made a change for which we, as TFGM, do not feel there is a need to intervene. At the bus subcommittee, operators are in attendance to take questions, and certainly at last Friday's meeting, members used that opportunity to question them on some of those decisions. Annex B, this is where changes, where TFGM feel there is a need to intervene, so where changes have been made by the commercial market and we feel we need to step in and support. So in this particular section, there is a financial impact on our budget, and this will be reported in Part B. And finally, Annex C. Annex C relates to the subsidised bus network. This is where we look at, in this particular part of the report, we've looked at opportunities where maybe services aren't running as punctual as they should be, where maybe we've had customer complaints or customer feedback, where we sometimes use stakeholder engagement or speak to yourselves as members and look to tinker with some of the services. In this particular report, there are no financial impacts on the budget with relation to Annex C. Thank you, Chairman. Happy to take any questions or comment.
Okay, has any members got any questions? John?
Comment rather than a question, Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank officers for meeting me outside of after the bus meeting to discuss some of the concerns that I had relating to one of the services that isn't actually being decided upon today. And that's what the outcome of people locally in Stockport wanted. They didn't want the decision being made straight away. They wanted some more time to see whether they could make the case for retaining the 380, 381 service. So I appreciate the support from the officers in relation to the concerns that I've raised there. And that was all I wanted to mention.
Okay, thank you very much. Phil?
Thanks, Chair. In relation to the 129 bus service, Nick, we're not happy with the comments made in the report, but after a long discussion with Nick, we've got to take on board what you say because of the costings. But thanks for your advice and help on the matter, Nick.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can we all agree that then, please? Smashing, thank you very much. Item 10, governance review. Liz?
Yeah, a short and hopefully self-explanatory report which confirms the agreement by the Combined Authority on the 29th of June to reduce the size of TFGMC to 23, and confirms that that decision will now be taken through the districts, and it'll go through your own district procedures, because districts have been requested the same as set out in section 111D of the report. We've set out a series of dates and times for future meetings, and also use the opportunity to ask members if they've got any comments on the existing terms of reference.
Okay, has any members got any comments? John?
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I don't see any clarity in relation to how the 10 members are actually selected to ensure political balance on this committee. Manchester Authority has already tried to nominate 3 Labour members as the 3 people that would come to the authority from Manchester, and has actually had to withdraw, to ignore it on the minutes when it went to full council. Because there is no clarity how we can ensure the political balance, because if all the local authorities choose to nominate Labour members, there'll be no opposition members to be pulled onto the committee to ensure political balance. It has to be up to both the Liberal Democrat group and the Conservative group to decide who are going to be the opposition members to create political balance on this committee, in the same way that the scrutiny committees of the combined authorities make that decision. It's not up to Labour councillors to decide who are going to be Liberal Democrat or Conservative members on this authority, and this report does not address that issue. I tried to get an answer from Transport for Greater Manchester before my council meeting on Wednesday, and was assured I was getting a call back and didn't. And this report doesn't provide any clarity at all.
I presume you mean the CA. You tried to get some information back, because it's a CA report itself.
Well, I actually rang Transport for Greater Manchester, and then I was told I was getting a call back from the combined authority.
Okay, I've got Roger first.
Thanks. Well, I can't disguise what my views on this. Of course, I don't agree with reducing the size of the committee to 23, and I've told just about everybody in Greater Manchester that for about 5 years. So, but the reason is political balance. I think it's crucial in transport, because we need one voice when we meet ministers. We don't want voices from 3 different political parties. So, and that's been important in the past. But in terms of the terms of reference, I think, to be fair, the combined authority is feeling its way through the various things. I mean, Doreen's just mentioned the issue of the scrutiny committee. And I think with the terms of reference of this committee, we're going to have to try and pick up some of the areas that previously this committee may not have dealt with. One member mentioned about the highways issues, which are related. Another member mentioned about taxi and private hire policy issues. There's a number of issues like that. But the final bit is the subcommittee structure, because it's a lot easier to run when there's 33 than it is with 23. And I think that needs some, and I hope, Chair, that you'll be involved in any discussions on that, just to try and make sense of it.
Hopefully. Doreen?
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree with Roger. I don't agree with the amount of 23, because we need political balance. I mean, let's be fair, this committee is responsible for the Metrolink going to Ashton. It was cross-party support. We went down to Westminster, and it was fought out by everybody, and we got it. We also got the Ordsall curve, because we went to Westminster and we lobbied. We got bus franchising, because this committee went down cross-party and fought hard for it. So to take it down to 23, you won't have the correct political balance that we've got now. But the other comment I'd like to make is the fact of openness and transparency. I mean, I'm vice chair and have been for 4 years, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I'm vice chair of TFGM, and nobody, I mean nobody, has even spoke to me once from GMCA. They've not asked my opinion. They've not said, what does your committee do? I just find it appalling. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks for those comments. Annette?
My concern really is I've been on this committee 2 years, and I have been bowled over by how members, the intimate knowledge various members have of the various localities they live in, the bus routes, the rail routes, and I think that I'm afraid that's going to be lost. There is a desire, I've read something from GMCA, where all local authorities provide the Mayor with local intelligence regarding gaps in the local bus network to inform further discussions with bus operators. Well, that happens now. The committee is very well set up to do that, and I would be I do not want to see this lost in whatever happens in the future of this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got Howard.
Yes, same vein. So I suppose, you know, it's just, we need a functioning transport. I think the argument's been made very well in terms of some of the lobbying we've done to make sure we speak with some voice. So, okay, we've got a meeting scheduled here now. I'll just take myself, for example. So I don't know if I'll be one of the 2 Liberal Democrats on this, and I'm on the capital project. So do I turn up on the 27th of July or do I not? Do I turn up on the 12th of October? Do I get it in my day? And then the next thing, we'll be getting slagged off for not turning up to meetings. But the first thing you need to know is, what's your membership? And then how you divide it up. And that's taken us a meeting or 2. But we'd have usually done that in July. I just can't believe something so simple as this has taken so long and people are making it so hard work. Why didn't we have all this sorted before? And whatever we think about the 23, and I agree with everybody else about that, and we could have decided who they all were, sorted it all out at our own all-annual council meetings. We'd know what the 23 membership was now. We could have populated the committees and we could get on. I am fearful that we will end up with either incoherent meetings or not the expertise we've got sat around this table, whoever the 23 are, at these things. Greater Manchester will be the worse off for that. And it's just somebody's incompetence that they don't think it's important. And if connectivity and transport isn't one of the things that is the glue that makes it all work, about inclusion, about jobs, about work, about, sorry, I know I'm talking to the converted, but I just can't believe. So, you know, my question would be, we've just had, if I just take Oldham for example, we just had our council meeting this week. We haven't got another one now till end of September. Most people will be the same as that. So when are the council's going to decide who these people are? When do we decide, and it's, I think it's John's point at the end, who the Conservative and Liberal, you know, when is that going to be? September? October? And then what happens to these meetings in between? And I realise, Chair, you might not be able to answer some of these questions, but it's not just me, is it? It's, you know, I just don't understand how somebody expects you to make the system work when you don't know what the members are of the committee.
Thanks for that. Anybody else got any more feelings towards it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue came up in the Conservative group before this meeting, and it was anticipated quite reasonably that according to political balance rules, well, if each borough has 2 representatives, then there would be 1 opposition member and 1 ruling group member. The discussion was we were going to go away to our own boroughs and discuss it in our own boroughs. But in light of the information given by Councillor Leach here, that Manchester has tried to appoint 3 Labour members, well, that to me sort of, it seems like on one level it's just pure antics, but on another level, that's 1 borough playing off against the other 9, because I would point out that if Manchester, under political balance rules, were to get 3 Labour councillors, then it would mean 1 of the other boroughs would have no Labour representatives at all. So it might well be that, for example, and you can imagine how silly this would seem, that Wigan might get 2 opposition representatives and no Labour representative when Labour has 60 councillors out of the 75 available. And it does seem now like what was thought to be a fairly straightforward thing, which just hadn't been put down in writing, now seems to be a far more contentious issue. And I think it would be helpful if members were given more details on what the composition of the reformed authority would look like post-haste. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Obviously, I agree with Roger's sentiments, but I also think that John Leach is right, that it's not for the controlling group to tell minority groups who their representatives are. So the idea that the combined authority could just simply say, well, if I were to be Machiavellian, I'd choose some extremely weak and inarticulate Liberal Democrats and Tories. There'd be plenty to go at, I hasten to add. There'd be plenty to go at, but that's what you would do if you were cynical. But that's not democracy. Each individual political party has the right to appoint their representatives pro rata to their strength within the conurbation, and I think that's an important principle.
And don't forget, it's not just the political balance argument as well. There's gender balance, etc. as well. So, yes?
I don't understand why it's written so vaguely. If it's political balance, they need to put numbers. We're all in our groups working out what the numbers are, and that is absolutely ridiculous. It's gone on for, you're agreeing with me, aren't you? It's gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks now. Why? You feel there's something sinister going on. I'm sure there isn't, because you're all very delightful people. But this gentleman here has said Manchester are conniving it, and that's really very, very worrying. We're all going to go to our next council meeting and find the same things happening. Can we have some reassurance, Chairman? Because you've listened very patiently, but you've not actually said anything.
Just to confirm, we're all very delightful people that's in this room, but we're not the ones who are making the decisions, unfortunately. The whole point of today's meeting is to express our concerns so it can be took back to the CA. But Liz, would you like to comment on anything?
Yeah, I suppose hopefully to provide a bit of clarity. In terms of a committee of 23, I think as the report says, and apologies if it's too obtuse, it says the districts will appoint one each, with Manchester appointing two based on population and financial contribution to the levy. The CA will appoint one member, the Mayor will appoint one member, and then a further 10 members will be appointed by the CA from nominations from the districts, and to ensure that the 23 reflects political balance across Greater Manchester. So with a committee of 23, the political balance across Greater Manchester is 17 Labour, 4 Conservative, 2 Liberal. Comes to 23, yeah?
Okay. John?
I thank Liz for trying to provide some clarity, but actually that relies on the individual local authorities actually nominating the people that the Lib Dem group and the Conservative group across Greater Manchester have decided they want to be their members. In the same way that happens on the scrutiny committees of the combined authority. When you have an authority like Manchester just putting forward 3 Labour members without any consultation whatsoever with the opposition, and then having to remove a minute of a meeting and pretend it had never actually been decided, it's just simply not acceptable. So it has to be written down that the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives in Greater Manchester are able to put forward their own nominations. The obvious way of doing this is for each group in each local authority to be nominating people, and then the opposition parties deciding which members are going to go onto that committee, and then the rest of the Labour members need to be decided from the pool of members that have been nominated by the individual Labour authorities. It's not rocket science.
And your comments have been noted. Okay, so Lizzie's put those down. But please be aware, there's not just you that's worried about the position on this committee afterwards. That's why we want to leave it with 33. So it's not just you that you're concerned with. Okay.
Yeah, Chair, just to clarify, I absolutely agree that the authority should not be reduced to 23, but it's a Labour mayor that's making that decision, nobody else.
Right. And thanks for making it political. So, Councillor?
Thanks, Chair. It's regarding this pool of 10 people and all the rest of it. Nobody's explained to me yet or given me an example. I did write to you and ask if you could ask for an example How are they going to get political balance out of that pool of 10 members when it's 10 Labour-controlled local authorities who will be nominating those 10 members? And I agree with John that it's up to each district political party to nominate who their opposition members are going to be, not the CA or anybody else. We can't say to Rochdale or Bury that, you know, you're going to have a Conservative represent you on... the CA shouldn't be able to do that. So I'd like an example of what this committee of 23 would look like if it was arranged in the manner that's printed in this report.
We've got those comments down. Is it on... What's it on, James? We've already had you.
Thank you very much. Yes, if anything, there's more concern come out of the answers that we've had, because obviously with the combination of political balance and gender balance, well, when we remember that the Fire Authority was abolished and turned into the Fire Committee, the political balance was, I think, we thought reasonably fair, because it was a ruling group member and an opposition group member from every borough. The gender balance made it quite difficult because, as you know, at Wigan, there's only one female member of the opposition. It was Kath Houlton. So it meant that we had one person that we could theoretically put forward from the entire opposition. But at least then you felt there was an even balance from each borough. Now, I would point out that in 7 of the boroughs, the Conservatives are the opposition. In 3 of the boroughs, the Liberal Democrats are the opposition. In a number of boroughs, there will be no opposition members at all, given that interpretation of political balance. So, if anything, the political balance, and when you combine that with gender balance, is actually worse than the ones proposed for the Fire Committee when it transitioned from the Fire Authority. And I would point out that after 12 months, that body was abolished and folded away anyway. I can't imagine this body in its reform form lasting any longer if it doesn't have the support of opposition members. And given this has only just come out now, to my knowledge, as Councillor Leach has said, there's been very little information about how it will be constituted. I think we're going to have a lot of problems when this goes back to our own boroughs. I don't think it will have a great deal of cross-party support. And as I've said, well, if some boroughs decide to be clever and appoint full slates of ruling group members, there are other boroughs which are Labour-controlled, which might then be forced to appoint 2 opposition members and have no Labour representatives at all. I think that, if anything, the answers we've had today generate more concern than we had before we asked them. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to bring something else into it, that, which is the terms of reference. And obviously the terms of reference are fairly standard, but I do notice that they bring a lot more in terms of highways management. I'm also really sort of interested in the beelines and the cycling agenda. So we've got new terms of reference, we've got this huge great agenda happening to transport, and yet our committee dates and committee structure seems to be exactly the same, no change whatsoever. So it seems to me that we are welcoming to a new world, but actually in terms of the actual committees, they'll be smaller, but exactly the same committees that we've always had. And I just think that's a missed opportunity.
I agree. Guy? And then we're going to move on.
I think one of the proposals here is that the 10 districts should send their executive member for transport to the committee, and that, in my judgment, is a hangover from when some people wanted the committee to just have 10 members. And it made sense then that if you were going to have just 10 members. It should be the person with the cognate responsibility within the borough. But now that we've expanded it to 23, that doesn't seem such a pressing thing. Over the years, I've been chair of this authority for 5 years and deputy for 18 over many years. And under these proposals, I won't be nominated by my district because I'm not the executive member. And it never suited me over all those years to do that, because Bolton took the view that anybody who was the chairman or deputy of this authority had a big enough job looking across the interests of the whole of Greater Manchester rather than minding shop in the individual borough. And I've had other responsibilities in Bolton, but not necessarily this transport one, because I was expected to take a wider county-wide view. And I think the idea that we should only send, the district should only send the executive member for transport is a direct spillover from the failed attempt to get us down to 10 members. And I think it's regrettable.
Okay, thanks everybody for the comments. Lizzie's wrote those down and is going to take it back, and hopefully we'll get some information and get sent back to this committee. Okay, please take the opportunity to take your concerns also back to your leader of your individual authorities. Okay, thank you very much. Item 11, Metrolink capital update, and we've got Danny.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the Metrolink capital update, it's probably easier to take questions. I mean, essentially, there's 4 elements on here now. We've added the tram capacity improvements to the end, but essentially the TMS update, as many members know, the TMS is essentially the signalling program on Metrolink that has been going on for a number of years now. I guess there's very little left to do, which includes the Berry line and eventually the section between Timperley and Altrincham. During the period, we opened the signalling system as far as Whitefield on the Berry line. That's a significant step in terms of the ability for us, if there are disruptions on the Berry line, to bring services, bring people as far as we can, at least as far as Whitefield, to turn around. But really, that's it. And I think the programme will continue on in terms of upgrading sort of points and signals around the network up until spring 2019, as it says in the report. The Trafford Park line extension is going very well. There's lots of sort of technical updates in there, but I think for me, it's probably about 50% through construction. And there's no major challenges there, but I think we're entering into a phase now where we're installing more of the traditional tram infrastructure rather than sort of the utility works and so on. On our renewals enhancements programme, we're looking to award a framework in the coming months to following a procurement for various different contractors so that we can start to award works. Lots of works that this committee would be interested in on the Metrolink network will go through sort of renewals and enhancements. It's lower level things like stop upgrades and improvements and so on. So that's a significant step in our ability to continue those works. And on the tram capacity improvements, I think we mentioned earlier, and there's probably an opportunity to ask questions. I guess we signed the contract with Bombardier for 27 more vehicles under the Transforming Cities Fund. We are also now looking at the remainder of the infrastructure that is needed to be provided to run those vehicles as doubles. For example, we need extra stabling in Trafford Depot, and we need to upgrade some of the power along the network so that we can have the capacity to run doubles. So we're going through that exercise at the moment. And I think that's all there really is to say. I did mention earlier on, so there is a note in there on our funding bid for an extension of the airport line to T2. We haven't yet had feedback, but of course this committee will be informed in due course if and when we do. Okay, has anybody got any questions on that? John?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to possible Metrolink expansion funding bids, I know that there has been talk over a number of years about possible extensions across different parts of Greater Manchester, including from Didsbury to Stockport, for instance. But I just wondered whether there is actually a list of priorities that have ever been put together about what happens after we get the extension out to T2 and then the HS2 station. Are there any other bids that are ready to go when there is the potential for funding to be bid for? Do we actually have a list somewhere? And if not, what are we doing about having a wish list for future Metrolink expansions?
Yeah, Annette?
Well, that's the question I would like to ask. very better put than I would have put it. It was my last occasion to press for the extension of the tramway into Stockport, and perhaps to express a sadness that we have this capital funding of 243 million, of which 80 million is going towards new trams, rather than extension of the infrastructure, the lines.
Phil?
Thanks, Chair. I hope Danny can take away comments from our leader in Rochdale that we are looking forward, hopefully, if you've got any money left, to extend the Metrolink into Middleton at some stage.
Go on, Howard.
Well, we'll start the bid, shall we? I just wondered, seems one of the barriers for not running trams from Rochdale through to Piccadilly was the lack of rolling stock. We know we've got all these. I'm hoping that now gets back on the agenda, because that is a clear aspiration of us and colleagues from Rochdale. We're not greedy. We don't want every tram. Every other one will do nicely. But it is a key part of our connectivity into a mainline station in terms of that. So I'm just hoping, since that was one of the reasons quoted why we couldn't do it, now we've got these in additional to increasing the capacity. Could we just ask that be looked at again as well, Chair? Thank you.
Okay, Kate?
Thank you, Chair. As the Cabinet Lead for Strategic Transport at Stockport Council, I'd like to just offer my Stockport Council colleagues a Metrolink briefing back at the Town Hall, just to update them on where we're up to with our discussions with TFGM. And then I think if you get the answer to your question from TFGM and then our briefing, you can see the issues through both ends of the telescope, and I think that might help.
Okay, I'll bring Eunice in and then I'll pass it over to Danny.
I can appreciate Rochdale wanting the extra line in, but we've just had a recent press release to say the trams are coming to Wigan. So I'd much prefer the money was spent on trams coming to Wigan, because the services we've got at the moment, the train service coming into Manchester and the airport, is absolutely abysmal. Apart from everything else, the trains don't turn up. You can't get on them, they stop, you have to change trains. So we've no real through train yet into Manchester. So I would welcome a tram service coming over to Wigan.
Danny?
Okay, thanks.
Be careful how you answer this.
Yeah, everyone wants a tram, I think. We'd have to build some tracks to Wigan first, Eunice. So there's a lot of questions there, and they all relate to strategy. So I think there's probably a couple of things to point out. What we are working on, in line with our published 2040 strategy, is what we call a rapid transit strategy, which includes Metrolink amongst other things. And I think the point is, if you take that and this sort of spatial framework that's being revised, it speaks about connectivity across the whole region. It's not necessarily that Metrolink is the right answer. In some cases it is, in some cases it might be something different. But to answer, I guess, Councillor Leach's questions first, is there a list? There is a list of schemes. I think on it, or more mature on it, is obviously the Terminal 2 expansion, which we tried to capitalise or use the opportunity while Manchester Airport is undergoing a facelift. And then I think after that, it would be to complete what we call the Western Loop, which would bring that extension further on, back around onto the existing airport line at Roundthorne, which would give better connectivity to Withenshaw Hospital, for example, and developments that are due to take place there. Councillor Burke, Middleton is on that list. I'm not sure how whereabouts on that list is. I think the work we need to do at the moment is to actually do the prioritisation of that. I mean, there isn't, on our wish list for funding schemes that is in there, but I think it will be a long time away. And of course, Stockport is there too on the same list, and I think we are doing some work with Stockport. So in terms of that, I think it's probably too early to sort of publish a list, but I think at TFGM we'd certainly be happy to talk members through the possibilities, I guess. And just in response to Councillor Sykes, I think the issue for us in taking trams between Oldham and Piccadilly isn't necessarily the number of vehicles, it's the sort of capacity and the constraints of the operational network in the city centre. There are only so many trams that we can actually pass through Piccadilly. Obviously, Ashton services do, and I think if we were to do that soon, we would probably have to take something else out, so Altrincham or Bury service would have to be removed from Piccadilly. We did some surveys when we were discussing this topic last year, and we found that actually the majority of people who travel from Oldham and Rochdale, it's St. Peter's Square is the destination where they go for their commutes. It's the biggest sort of employment draw in the city centre. So actually, where some people do have to change at Victoria for an onward connection to Piccadilly, even more people would have to change at Victoria for an onward connection to St. Peter's Square if we were to do that. But I did think what we have committed to is in the sort of further future, looking at HS2 and its arrival in Manchester would need some work done to Piccadilly itself. And I think that would be an opportunity to, that is an opportunity that we're looking at to redesign, I guess, the layout of the Metrolink network, which would provide that capacity at that stage then.
Okay, I've got Angelique.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to have a look at a different aspect of this. This is a significant amount of resources that we're going to be spending. 83 million for capacity improvements, 17 million to 100 to purchase the trams as per 5.2. So the question I have to ask is this. Manchester City Council is giving a weighting of 20% to social value when we are purchasing services or goods, and I wonder if you have a social value policy. I suspect that the answer is yes, and that you have the Greater Manchester Combined Authority social value policy, whose weighting currently is 10%. So I'd like to find out what are the outcomes over and above the actual purchase of trams that we aspire to secure via this tendering process, and also any consideration on social value outcomes in relation to the maintenance of the fleet after it has been acquired?
That's a very good question. We appointed Keolis Amy Metrolink on foot of a long procurement last July. So actually next week is the 1 year anniversary of what we used to call the new operator, but the operator. And in that, social value played a huge part, and that was some feedback that we had from members and from the Combined Authority. So we did evaluate social value as part of that procurement, and in there was a social value charter which seeks to do things like, well, firstly there's the generation of employment, I guess, but more importantly than that, it seeks to sort of generate that employment in traditionally underrepresented communities and so on. But a big part of that is that the value chain, or in the procurement, the supply chain, to source, I can't remember the figures, but at least I think 40% of services from within a 25-mile radius of Manchester. So there is an analysis done actually ongoing at the moment of the supply chain with regard to operations and maintenance, certainly, to see how close we are to that charter. A lot of our suppliers are actually local. We talk to a lot of local suppliers. We try to encourage them to come into us for the provision of, let's say, smaller pieces of equipment. There aren't any tram manufacturers, I guess, in the region. We do have to go international for that. But in terms of the infrastructure, I think we'll definitely take that on board when we're procuring the bits and pieces that we do need to buy.
Yes, thank you. 25-mile radius from Manchester includes Liverpool as well. I think it's quite wide radius. I can understand that for specialist services you might need to have a large radius so that you can get the service that you need. However, we are elected to represent people that live in Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
So I would like to urge you to give us a little bit of more detail, maybe in the future. I wonder if you report formally on social value, and can that be made accessible to us?
I think we don't, but we can do, certainly. Yeah, I mean, we do talk to businesses around Greater Manchester all the time. We met a company, a very small startup from Stockport, a couple of weeks ago to talk about their expertise in networking, as in communications networks and so on, to improve CCTV and that kind of thing. There's plenty of opportunities, yeah, so can do.
Thank you, Chair. It's almost inevitable that as soon as we start, we're almost at the completion of one Metrolink line. We move on to the next. But from my point of view, with the Trafford Park line going through, I just want to reiterate that we need to make sure that the final design, the sort of how it lives with traffic, is of vital importance, that we don't take our eyes off that ball onto the next project, because we have had a history of new Metrolink lines being blighted by interactions with motor cars, cars on the tram lines, crashes with cars and trams. I just want to make the point that if a tram hits a car at that circle outside the Trafford Centre, it will close down the M60 within about 3 minutes. I just want to make sure we get the design right so that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Okay, before you answer that, I'll just bring in Phil.
Thanks, Chair. Early last year, or maybe 18 months ago, to be honest, before 2CC opened, we spoke about running direct Rochdale into Piccadilly and Shoreham Crompton into East Didsbury, and that was put on the table as long as we could sort the back of Piccadilly out, which Metrolink have now done because they run services what should have terminated at the back of Piccadilly up to the Etihad. And yet again now, 12 months down the line, we're being told something else, that you are looking at it. We got told when the timetable restructuring came in and the different routes got put out to the public, that we would seriously consider running Rochdale into Piccadilly. We don't want to keep waiting around for Rochdale to go into Piccadilly. We've got massive investment being made in Rochdale town centre, and it's a much needed link. I appreciate what you're saying, Danny, about people going to St Peter's Square because they work in that area, but we've got visitors coming from Piccadilly. They shouldn't have to walk down to St Peter's Square or make another connection at Victoria. They should be able to get on the tram at Piccadilly direct through to Rochdale.
Okay, Danny, do you want to say those?
Yeah, 2 points. I'll take Councillor Cordingley's with regard to the design of the Trafford Park line. Yeah, we have far too many road traffic collisions, tram and car on the network, and vehicle incursions, cars trapped on the tracks that disrupt services. We're taking some intervention actually to stop that now, so we're coming up with redesigns for the existing network, and we'll make sure that those are reapplied, I guess, to the Trafford Park line. We certainly don't want to be in the same situation, so I'll take that one on board. And then Councillor Burke, I think we've had this debate, not you and I, but certainly this committee has a number of times, and I think the most recent paperwork certainly on it was in some of the documentation that went to the combined authority and I think wider leaders regarding the purchase of the additional trams, and I think it was in that paper, and maybe I need to distribute that one more widely, where we explained the points I was making to Councillor Sykes, that really it's not the number of vehicles, but it's the nature of the infrastructure. So Piccadilly, as I say, can only handle a certain amount of through trams. We did look at it. The way to do it would have been to have a different sort of timetable change where we would have removed the Berry, for example, service, which goes directly to Pick. So there definitely are possibilities. It just means that where one region gains, another one would have to lose, and I think there would be need to be a wider debate on that one.
Okay, we'll take that up. Guy, last one.
Yeah, well, as the system becomes more sophisticated, and Andrew Fender always used to say this, people have got to get used to regarding this, like the London Underground, as an extremely complicated system where you work out what journeys you want to make and expect to make changes and expect to change trams, because that's the only way you'll optimise the capacity of the system, maximise revenue and give us an opportunity to expand it. So when we first started, it was a linear line, and people got quite used to the idea that you got off at one end and got off at the other. But as it becomes a more complicated network, people will learn how to make journeys by changing trams. That will maximise the capacity of the system, maximise revenue, and in the long term enable us to expand it. So I think we've just got to keep banging that message away. As it becomes more complicated, journey changes will have to be made.
That's a fair comment. Okay, thank you very much for all your interest in that. I'm going to move on to item... Yeah, we all want one first, so we know what it's like.
We all want a yacht, as we used to say.
Okay, item 12, rail infrastructure update. We've got Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a report to provide an update on a number of rail station infrastructure schemes and initiatives in GM. So this report provides an update on our rail station improvement strategy, which is known as RSIS, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. Rail station accessibility, although there's a further report on that, so I won't go into any detail on this report, if that's okay, Chair. Salford Central Rail Station, Hattersley Rail Station based park and rides, cycling facilities at rail stations, Rochdale Underpass, and Northern Station Investment Fund. In terms of rail station improvement strategy, RSIS, this was initially established to improve existing passenger security and information systems at 51 rail stations across Greater Manchester as funding became available. So phase 1 works commenced in September 2017, and all those works are now complete with the exception of Hallinor Wood and Hagfold. And that's because we are waiting for Northern to do their station investment fund works at those stations so that we can coordinate the works and make sure that we come up with the right passenger solution. So they're putting shelters in. We're making sure that our equipment is in the right place in accordance with the new shelters. So we're trying to not go in twice and do the work twice. So they'll be complete soon. With regards to phase 2, the designs have been completed and we're hoping to deliver in this financial year. And there's a complete list of the stations and associated scope in Appendix 1. Just a little bit of detail on Salford Central Rail Station, because there's been a lot of activity on that. With regards to Phase 1A, which is platforms 1 and 2, platform and canopy enhancement, Network Rail have advised us that the scheme has been removed from the Control Period 5 work bank with the intention to complete the development work, which is known as GRIP 3 to 5 in the industry, and the delivery work, which is known as GRIP 6 to 8 in the industry, in the Control Period 6. So that means that it's deferred to the period from April 2019 to the 31st of March 2024. So we've been talking to Network Rail to try and bring that forward again, and those discussions are still ongoing. In terms of the Phase 1B, which is the feasibility design work, to accommodate longer trains for platforms 3, 4 and 5, we have started a feasibility study in August 2017, and we want to progress the preferred option through stages GRIP 3 to 5, so that's all the design stages within Network Rail's project management GRIP stages, to commence in September 2018. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anybody got any questions on this? Eunice?
item 4, which is the Salford Central Railway Station. I do sort of welcome the new work that's being done on there, but it comes back again to the step down from the train to the platform and the gap between the train and the platform. It's all right providing for longer trains, but if you can't get off the train or you have difficulty getting off the train, it doesn't help. And I just wondered when this is going to be addressed. This has been going on since I came on, and it's still not been addressed. We get all the little bits and pieces tagged on at the end, but there's nothing to address that step down from the train.
Roger?
No, it was only to say to Caroline and everybody who possibly can help is helping with Salford Central, because Salford Central is a key rail station for the centre of Manchester, because I think it goes without saying, if you were walking to Manchester Town Hall, you could probably walk there quicker from Salford Central than any other railway station. So it's a key station. Network Rail are not easy to deal with. They've got delays in the system. They say they're dealing with budgetary issues. But TFGM and others are doing everything we can, and we're going to have to keep pressing the case.
Thank you. It was on the Salford Central Station initially. This proposal to extend platforms 1 and 2, it is essential for getting the longer trains, which is essential on the Bolton corridor. And I hope that it's being discussed by National Rail, that it's not going to put unnecessary delay on that service. The other question I'd like to raise is that on the Northern Connect staff service stations, can we try and get more information from Northern, what improvements they're actually going to be doing to the Northern Connect stations, instead of just saying, you know, it's going to be part of the station investment fund? What actual concrete things are going to be doing to improve the facilities there? Thank you.
Take one more first before I come over to you. Zidra?
I hear that completely.
Hi, thank you. Moving away from the Salford station, I would like to interested also to see, because there are 30 million enhancement to stations investment, and quite a lot of stations are in really bad condition. They need lack of paint, cleaning. So I would like to see if they can actually do to those stations, for example, Levenshulme, there is paint falling, the pieces falling off, and really, really needs investment, which one wouldn't require millions, but a bit of appearance would actually be good.
Yes, so hopefully I've captured all of them. So in terms of what work we're doing, so phase 1A is us trying to fund enhancements to work that Network Rail is already doing under their renewal scheme. And Councillor Jones has alluded to some of the frustrations that we've been facing with this. Obviously, we were very disappointed that that has been put back into control period 6 in terms of our work, but also in terms of what Network Rail are doing. And we're working with them to make sure that they maximise what that scheme does instead of doing the absolute bare minimum, which without our intervention would absolutely be what they're doing. So share all of your aspirations for Salford Central, and that's what we're working towards. In terms of the SIF work, I didn't capture all of that because there was lots of banging going on, but I think what you were asking was, can we have more detail on what the SIF programme actually is in terms of infrastructure updates? Yeah, so we'll come back with that. We'll talk to Northern, we'll get hold of a plan. They've sent us a plan, but it's not completely up to date. So we'll get the completely up-to-date plan and we'll put it in a future report. About
improvements
sorry,
to stations.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
It's about the improvements to the station, because obviously enhancement, they agreed to invest 30 millions, but most of the stations don't see any investments at all. The trees growing, the condition of the station is really, really poorly. So would like to see if that could be invested and make sure that all the stations receive.
Yeah, so we are getting details on the Station Improvement Fund work, so hopefully that they do improve things like ambience. However, they do tend to concentrate on physical things they can put on stations that they can call enhancements. I completely agree with you that the wider station needs to be looked at, and that really isn't even renewal, that's just basic maintenance, and we will continue to push that with Northern because the state of the stations across the network is not what we would want it to be.
Okay, I've got Annette.
Check on the Station Investment Fund. There's time scale for phase 3. I've asked about this before. Is there a time scale now for when we might find out which stations might be included?
Sorry, I'm just consulting with Kat, who's my sponsor for this scheme. I don't believe we know that, but we will go away and ask that question and see if we can get you a better answer than you've obviously been getting.
Okay, I'll bring you Guy.
Yeah, it's following what Zidra said. Before we deal with stations that are shabby, we need to deal with stations that are dangerous. And some of the wooden stations that were introduced 20, 25 years ago are in a dangerous condition. Harrith Wood, I know in Bolton, is in a dangerous condition. It really needs, there are holes in the woodwork that could be very dangerous, particularly for small children, that should be cordoned off. I know that Tameside have similar problems, and I know that Trafford have similar problems. So we really need to get a grip, or Network Rail need to get a grip with stations that are frankly dangerous to people that are using them.
Okay, anybody got any more questions? No? Right, move on to item 13. Rail Station Accessibility Programme. Caroline?
So this report sets out the work we've been doing on station accessibility and the next steps in order to take advantage of the Access for All funding being made available in October this year. So in way of a bit of introduction, members may recall in 2009, a Capital Projects and Policy report identified 41 rail stations as accessible, 43% of stations across the GM conurbation. Obviously, we aspire for that to be 100%, and we would love the funding to be available to do that tomorrow, but we need to be realistic. So what this report is trying to do is move forward and get some more funding for some more of those stations. In 2009, TFGM undertook an assessment of issues associated with rail station accessibility. We defined a prioritised programme of accessibility improvements. So this was a list of, should funding become available, which stations we would try and look at first. The output from this process was a top 10 list of rail stations which required step-free access. Since then, there's been more data available. We've updated our policies, and we've seen a requirement to update the prioritisation of that list. This has included the need to update the baseline data and make reference to our latest strategic thinking, including the spatial framework work and Greater Manchester Transport Strategy 2040. It's proposed that the revised list is used to inform the next round of Access for All bidding, which is likely to open this summer, and we're expecting bid submissions to be due in late October, so that doesn't really give us that much time. This is especially true because it's proposed to utilise the revised priority list to inform feasibility studies. Studies are to be developed to GRIP 3 stage, which is outline design stage, to satisfy the bidding requirements for the Access for All fund. So Network Rail have advised us with DFT that we're far more likely to have our applications accepted if we have studies up to this GRIP 3 level, which shows that we're serious about doing this work. So these studies need to be commenced in this month, July, to ensure that the preferred options are available to support the bidding process for the funding. DFT also consider any funding for GRIP 3 studies as part of the match funding requirements. So our studies would be part of our match funding for these stations, which would make them be looked upon much more favourably. The first round of feasibility studies is proposed for the top 6 priority stations, which is picked out in the report. But the priority order should not be considered as the final order for delivering individual schemes. Rather, it sets the priorities for where GM should focus future development work, including feasibility studies, to inform a pipeline of accessibility improvement projects ready for delivery subject to funding. So, as I said at the beginning, our aspiration is for 100% of stations to be totally accessible, but what we don't want to do is miss this round of funding. So we need to get on with it and do these detailed design works so that we can apply for this funding successfully. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've got John.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the changes to the reprioritisation and how that's been decided, because some of the raw figures, some of the raw data would suggest that some of the stations, particularly Levenshulme, for instance, given the number of passengers using it, should be a higher priority than it actually is. And others that have ended up in the top 10, and apologies to anyone who uses Reddish North Station, but I don't quite understand the logic why that's ended up in the top 10. And I really had 2 questions in relation to that. One, is cost consideration one of the issues that leads something to be a higher priority? Because I can understand if we can do 5 stations for the cost of doing 1 station, it would make sense to do 5 stations because the number of passengers that we would be having a positive impact on would be higher. Whereas if it's simply just on numbers, it looks as though there's not any obvious reason why Levenshulme, for instance, isn't further up the list. The other question was in relation to the actual cost of all the schemes overall, and again, why we've not been given the information. There is a footnote on page 67. The capital cost estimates prepared in 2009 have not been reviewed. However, these have been uplifted to 2017 values, but we're not being given the information because, again, if we can get a lot done for less money, it makes sense for those to be a higher priority. But without that information, how are we expected to make a judgment about whether or not this is actually the right order of prioritisation?
Okay. Howard?
Welcome the revised table here, and it's just trying to understand the data. And obviously, it wouldn't surprise you, I'm going to just mention Greenfield, where one side is accessible and one isn't. I'm just trying to understand why that's listed at 14 and it has the second highest footfall of any of the stations listed, except Levenshulme's much bigger. But at 370, I'm trying to understand, because I have to explain this to people, as do other people here. Why is it at 14 when 370 people use it, when places, with the greatest of respect, are less than 100, who are further, you know, or just over 100, are much further up the list beyond it. So a coherent and plain English explanation, because people just feel that it's never going to get there. It is our only station, so it's like a double whammy. So you lose the trains, because we've now got 3 trains instead of stopping trains. We've lost them going to Piccadilly, they're now going to Victoria. Actually, totally the reverse of the argument we could have about Metrolink, and totally stands on the head the passenger numbers as well, because you can survey them and find that actually most people wanted to go to Piccadilly, but that wasn't a consideration for changing where the trains went when we swapped it to Victoria, because we did that for network reasons. It's just about consistency when we mustering these arguments. Some of us are noting this stuff, and it just depends what day of week it is and whether it's a train or a tram. But we can't understand why Greenfield is down there when it's second most out of the 20, second most used station, and why it's number 14 instead of number 2. It should be. Anybody logically looking at that list, I'd think it should be. Welcome an answer, Chair.
Do you want to come in on those 2 first, Caroline?
So In terms of your request to simplify the data, that's what we've tried to do, possibly made it too simple in terms of the report and not put all the detail in there that people would like to see. Completely happy to be completely transparent about that and go out to districts and talk to officers about individual cases if that's what people would like us to do. In terms of section 3, this is the reprioritisation of access priorities. So there's some bullet points in 3.2 about what the metrics were that this was measured on. Now, I appreciate that the table itself only has the metrics of footfall, so that's what your eyes are immediately drawn to. But they weren't all just assessed on football. They were assessed on patronage, socioeconomic data, capital costs, lots of other information such as where your nearest accessible station is, whether you're close to a accessible station via another mode of transport such as Metrolink. There is an appendix, Appendix B, which shows a map of where the current step-free accessed stations are, where there are stations with a ramp, albeit a steeper ramp than we would like, and where there are stations that are stepped access only. And part of the list was to try and make sure that the stations that we are targeting are ones where people don't have a close-by suitable alternative, to make sure that we don't have entire lines with no access ability. But happy to share far more detail with people if that's what they would like.
Chair, if you just come back. I accept the answer. So would you tell me where somebody in Greenfield who is disabled has to travel to in order to not meet steps, please, and how they do it? And that just provide us with the answer then, Adrian, wouldn't it? Just tell us how they do it.
We could say that, give you that details outside the meeting.
Certainly.
Okay. Kate, did you have your hand up before? Okay. I've got Peter then, please.
Thanks, Chair. On 2.2, on the table there, you've got Newton for Hyde and Broadbottom, which have both dropped down a place. I'd like that explaining. I'm pleased to see on 3.4 that you've now included Flowery Field Station, which is one of the wooden stations that Councillor Hawkin was referring to in Tameside. Now that's got a wooden ramp system, step ramp system, which I feel I'm quite mobile myself, but as I'm walking up and down it, you don't feel safe. And if you're slightly immobile, it's not a very good system at all. But going back to table 1, Black Rod was completed in 2012. So I can't see, looking around this room, anybody that's likely to be alive when Woodley Station's been done. And being a former funeral director, it's, might be being cynical, but the rate we're moving is likely to be 2067 before the ones in Tameside are even looked at. And it's just not good enough. Well, I've got shares in a funeral.
All right, okay, Peter. I've got Zidra first, please.
Well, I'm glad that the list was revised because I kind of agree that there are more things needs to be taken. I'm really glad the 11 June has come up because before it wasn't even on the number, within the number of tons, kind of. But I also would like to know, obviously, when you will apply for the bids, I understand you don't have the money secured at this stage, isn't it? For the station improvements, you don't have it now.
Yeah, so we're going to put in an ambitious bid. We haven't had that much success in the past, which was the point made about the pace. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here. What we want to do is put in an ambitious bid, make sure that we get as much funding as possible. It still won't be enough, however much we get, but let's get far more stations than we got last time round, which was just
so
one.
that's kind of leading question is, for example,
when you will apply, will it be for all 41 stations? And do you have like already a figure in mind, and obviously bid, and then obviously taking the, depending on how much money you will receive, first 10 or first 20? But do you have like amount now ready, kind of how much you want to bid for?
We're looking at that at the moment. We're unlikely to bid for 41 stations because we just wouldn't get it. And there has to be an element of match funding in this. So that's what the bringing it to outline design is all about. So if we pick some stations and we've done them to GRIP 3, we've shown that we're serious. But obviously that costs money. So we can't do that for all 41 stations as much as we'd like to because we just don't have the funding. So it's getting that balance right between having an ambitious bid and making sure that we get as much money as we can, but not squandering it away on 41 stations where DFT have only got a set amount of money through Network Rail to do this. So we're working through the exact number that we're going to bid for, but it's probably more like 10.
No?
Thank you, Chair. We don't have any train stations in Bury on the network, as you know, but I do wonder, is there a difference between footfall and patronage? Surely they're the same thing.
Not really. It's slightly used in the industry because it's using slightly different data, but not really. So footfall is representing patronage in this case, yeah.
Okay. Anybody got any more questions before I move on? No, thank you very much.
Yeah, so my answer is, let's make sure that we get this money this time round. We are lobbying all the time for more money to do these things. It's very high up on the Mayor's agenda, accessibility, so he's using every opportunity to talk about it as possible, as are we. So keep going, and I encourage everybody to support us in that because it is a lobbying job basically, because we need the funding. So the funding to do all of the stations we've quantified as more than £150 million, probably a lot more than that in reality when we look at it. So that's a lot of money that we need to find in order to do it, but I absolutely share your aspirations. We'd love this figure to be 100% as it should be.
Yeah, here. Okay, item 14, introduction to zonal verse structure, and I'm going to bring in Gareth. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. So this report follows a report to this committee last month and a presentation that I gave to the MRN committee this month. The report firstly summarises the proposal which was covered in greater detail last month. It then goes on to set out the approach that we took to the public engagement activity that ran between the 1st of June and the 17th of June. And in particular, it notes how awareness was raised through different channels, so we reached as wide a selection of the population of Greater Manchester and Metrolink users as we could. On that note, we had 5,000 respondents to the survey, which is consistent with, if not better than, similar activities that tfgm have undertaken recently. The report then sets out the results to the survey, and it sets them out under the subheadings of the categories under which we asked the questions, which were ease of understanding of the proposal, the impact on convenience compared to the current fare structure, impact on how people thought they would change their usage of Metrolink, so the frequency of use, and then lastly, value for money. The response was generally supportive of the proposal. Where it wasn't supportive, and particularly in the context of value for money, it was that people had a general misconception and a misunderstanding that the proposal introduced a fare increase in early 2019. If I can draw your attention to paragraph 4.19, this gives a more detailed response to the response I gave to Councillor Garrido last month and shows that empirically the proposal is better for customers and offers them lower fares than a continuation of the current as-is position. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chair. To reinforce the points I made at the last meeting and at the subcommittee meeting, I'm in favour of zonal fares for all the obvious reasons. It makes a lot of sense rather than the current system. But people who live in East Wythenshawe, at the southern end of the Wythenshawe Airport line, in nearly all the likely routes that they're going to take, will face the similar increase in fares that they would have had without the zonal, in January, without the zonal fare structure. Whereas people travelling pretty well the same number of stops within Zone 2 will have more than a 50% reduction in their fare. I'm not against people having reductions in their fare, significant or otherwise, but where is the, to use the other word, fare, where is the fairness in low-income people in Woodhouse Park, who I represent, and neighbouring areas, facing, all right, a fare increase, all right, similar to what they would have faced without the zonal fares, but facing a fare increase in January on what are already substantial fares for people on low income, whereas some people travelling a similar number of stops will have, because of the way that Zone 2 is done, will have a 50% reduction. It is not a fair FAIR improvement. And I know the response I got last time in passing was that people travelling from Woodhouse Park to Trafford Park in a couple of years would have a benefit in terms of what the current fare would be. But who in their right mind would be using the Metrolink to travel on public transport from Woodhouse Park to Trafford Park? It would make a lot more sense to use the bus in terms of the amount of time it would take and the distance. So I don't think that was really a sensible response. So I know there's winners and losers and all the rest of it, but it's just not fair. I'm not going to repeat the point I've made, but some people are slight losers or are more or less keeping up with high fares. Other people are getting great benefits, and it isn't even. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody got any more comments? Sorry, Noel, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Gareth. It's very concise, but one of the things it doesn't mention, bearing in mind that this will be coming on tap in about 6 months' time, is we in Bury made representations about the zoning plans. When will the result of that be known? Can you tell us, please? Thank you.
Okay, do you want to come back on those two first, Gareth, and then I'll bring Howard.
Councillor Newman, you did raise this at the MRN committee, and my response hasn't changed particularly. When designing the zonal structure, and particularly because of the network issues in South Manchester, where there are more interchange points, it becomes a case of relative benefits. And as you state, some customers do get a higher relative benefit compared to other customers. I would note that one of the policy objectives, which was noted in last month's report, is Metrolink is used primarily for people currently making radial journeys up and down the same line, a point that Councillor Harkin made earlier. One of the challenges about the expansion of Metrolink is how do we encourage people where they are less time sensitive perhaps, but cost sensitive, to use Metrolink to make the journeys which might take slightly longer to get to areas of employment like the Trafford Park area, like Media City, where they wouldn't do currently because they are charged the highest fares on the network. And for your residents accessing areas like Media City, like Trafford Park, which aren't incomprehensible journeys for people to make on Metrolink, they do get a significantly lower fare and a very real benefit. Councillor Bailey, the timing of, you'll note that this is a proposal of TFGM and the Mayor. We had representations from Bury and from Oldham about the Zone 3-4 boundaries. The timing of this meeting is such that we weren't able to include our position on those in those papers. Our position will be made clear in the GMCA paper, which is published next week, and prior to the publication of that, we will hold discussions with both Bury and with Oldham to cover our position on those issues.
Okay, Howard?
Yeah, no surprise. We've made similar representations. I think it's a shame you're going to tell us no after this meeting. Will be Howard's prediction. And I just think we've got an opportunity with the zonal system we've made representations, we debated it last night in our full council chamber, the leader of our council agrees with it, that I know it might please colleagues in Rochdale, but it has got to be wrong. It is cheaper for me to get from my station to Rochdale than it is to get to Oldham Town Centre. And all I've just asked is that we could all be in the same zone. And I know people will say, well, we've always had disproportionate charging there. Well, you've got a chance to right a wrong when we first created the network, haven't we? We used to send kids up chimneys, but we don't do it anymore. It's not a good enough reason. There's enough scope within the framework and the finances and everything else, and it'll just deliver quite an inclusive message and encourage people to use it. But also, the point I made before, and I'll continue to make it, it makes it less expensive for the hundreds of people who travel to that stop to work in the 3 major distribution centres that are based there: Shop Direct, Yodel and M Browns. And there's over 2,000 people work in those 3 establishments. And we've spent a lot of time and effort getting them out of cars and onto green transport plans, and it would deliver the right message to them as well. Because if you made it the right price, you get even more. So we wouldn't lose money, we'd actually generate some. So, you know, I make no apologies, Chair, for being boring and repetitive on this, but I just think we've got an opportunity. The zonal system is sensible, but let's just sort out the 1 or 2 anomalies that it illustrates in the system. And the one will be that Shaw and Crompton's in Zone 4, where the rest of Oldham is in Zone 3. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else got any more questions? No, Gareth? I think you partly answered that, to be fair, but...
Similar to my response to Councillor Bailey, we will in a separate forum have a discussion with you prior to the publication of the CA paper.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can we move item 15, exclusion to the press and public? Is that moved? Thank you very much.